On the night of October 16, 1590, a prince came home early from a hunting trip. He had told his wife he would be gone for 2 days. He told the household to expect him back on the 18th. He took the hunting dogs, his men, his horses, and rode out through the gates of Palazzo San Severo in Naples at sundown. He came back 4 hours later. He came back with 3 armed men behind him. He came back at an hour when the household was asleep, when his wife was in her bedroom, when his wife was not alone. He had not been hunting. He had been waiting. When he reached the second floor of the palazzo, he drew his weapon, kicked open the door of his wife's chamber, and walked into the room where she lay in bed with another man. What he did in that room over the next several minutes was so violent, so deliberate, and theatrical that the official inquest of the Neapolitan court would still be reading like a horror script 400 years later. His name was Don Carlo Gesualdo, Prince of Venosa, and in the morning, when the people of Naples woke up and walked past the palazzo, they saw what he had left for them on the public stairs. 2 bodies, his wife and her lover, naked, stabbed, displayed. He was never arrested. He was never tried. He was never even questioned. He walked out of his palazzo a free man and rode into the countryside, and there, in a castle in the hills of Avellino, he spent the next 23 years of his life writing some of the strangest, most beautiful, most disturbing music ever composed in Europe. Music so far ahead of its time and that no one understood it for 300 years. Music that sounds to modern ears like a horror film score written in the year 1611. Music that the Catholic Church still performs in its cathedrals during Holy Week, even though the man who wrote it had butchered his wife in her bed and was never punished for it. This is the story that they don't tell you in music history class. This is the story of the killer who became a composer and the composer who became a saint of sound, and of the bodies on the stairs that nobody even now has answered for. He was born in 1566 in a country called the Kingdom of Naples that does not exist anymore. He was the second son, one of the wealthiest and most powerful noble families in southern Italy. His mother was the niece of a cardinal who would one day become pope. His uncle was Carlo Borromeo, the Archbishop of Milan, later canonized as a Catholic saint. The Gesualdo family did not need to obey the law. The Gesualdo family was the law in their region. Their wealth was older than most European kingdoms, and their connections to Rome were so deep that the Vatican itself depended on their goodwill. Carlo was not supposed to inherit anything. His older brother, Luigi, was being groomed to take over the family lands and the title of Princess Venosa. Carlo was the spare, the second son, the one allowed to indulge these strange interests, and his interest was music. He played the lute. He played the harpsichord. He wrote madrigals, the popular vocal form of the Renaissance. By the late teens, he was already considered one of the most promising amateur composers in southern Italy. He was a noble who took music more seriously than nobles were supposed to take it, and the household tolerated it because he was the second son, and second sons were allowed to be strange. Then in 1584, Luigi died. Carlo was now their heir. He was now the future Prince of Venosa, and the family did what every great family in 16th century Italy did with a new heir. They began arranging his marriage. The woman they chose was his cousin. Her name was Maria Davalos. She was older than him. She was 25 to his 20. She had already been married twice before, and both husbands had died. The first of natural causes, the second under circumstances the Neapolitan gossip mills found suspicious. She was, by every contemporary account, one of the most beautiful women in Naples. Her hair was dark, her eyes were dark, and her reputation was darker. She had the kind of beauty that made men forget their wives, and the kind of past that made men nervous. Carlo married her in 1586. He was 20. She was 25. The Vatican itself had granted the dispensation because they were first cousins, and the church normally forbids marriages between first cousins. Ma per Gesualdo, la Chiesa faceva eccezioni. For the Gesualdos, the church made exceptions. They moved into Palazzo San Salvatore in central Naples. Maria gave him a son within a year. By external appearances, the marriage was a success. By every internal appearance, it was already over. Carlo was, in modern terms, obsessively introverted. He spent his days in his music room, locked away with his lute and manuscripts, working on madrigals. He spoke almost no one outside the household. He was small, pale, prematurely balding, and described by witnesses as physically unattractive, even by the modest standards of 16th century's aesthetics. He had no interest in court life, no interest in hunting, no interest in the social rituals that men of his rank were expected to perform. He had one interest: composition. Maria was the opposite. She was magnetic, she was sociable, she was, the rumors said, voracious. And she had married for the third time a man who would rather be alone with a manuscript than alone with her. In 1589, 3 years into the marriage, she met Fabrizio Caraffa, the Duke of Andaria. Caraffa was 26 years old. He was, the chroniclers wrote, the most beautiful man in Naples. He had a wife and 4 children. He had a body trained for war and a face trained for portraits. He was everything Carlo Gesualdo was not. The affair began at a religious ceremony of all places, a service at the church of San Domenico Maggiore. They were introduced. Within months, they were lovers. Within a year, the entire city knew about it. The Italian Renaissance had no concept of privacy for aristocracy. Servants talked, neighbors talked, priests talked. Everyone in Naples knew that the wife of the Prince of Venosa was sleeping with the Duke of Andria. Everyone, supposedly, except Carlo. This is where the historical record gets strange and where the story stops being a romance and starts becoming something darker. The friends of Maria warned her. They told her to end the affair. They told her that her husband was a Gesualdo, and that Gesualdo men did not tolerate dishonor, and that the law of the south of Italy gave a husband the legal right to kill an adulterous wife if he get caught in her act. She refused. Some accounts say she was in love, some say she was reckless, some say that she believed her husband was too obsessed with his music to notice anything outside the room he locked himself in. Carlo didn't notice. Carlo had been noticing for a long time. What hit it next is the part of the story that separates Gesualdo from 1,000 other Renaissance cuckolds who killed their wives in fits of rage. Carlo did not kill in rage. Carlo planned. He set the trap over weeks. He arranged for the staff to be reduced. He arranged for the chambermaids to be elsewhere on a specific night. He arranged for his uncle, a senior member of the household, to be conveniently traveling. And then he announced that he would be leaving on a hunting trip on the evening of October 16, 1590. Maria sent word to Fabrizio. The coast was clear. Come at midnight. Carlo rode out at sunset with his men and his dogs. He rode for an hour into the countryside outside Naples. Then he stopped, turned around, and rode back. He arrived at the rear gates of the Palazzo San Severo just before midnight. He climbed the back stairs in silence with 3 armed servants behind him. Fabrizio Carafa was already in the bedroom. The court inquest, conducted in the days after the murders and preserved in the archives of the Neapolitan Vicaria, recorded the testimony of the servants who witnessed what happened next. The details are graphic, the details are specific, the details have been verified by historians for 400 years. Carlo kicked open the door. He had a sword. His men had daggers. They fell upon Fabrizio first. Fabrizio was naked except for one Maria's nightgowns, which he had apparently put on as a part of the lover's game. He was stabbed multiple times. He was shot with a pistol. According to the inquest, his genitals were mutilated. He died on the floor. Then Carlo turned to Maria. She was still in the bed. He stabbed her many times. The court record uses the Italian word molte ferite, many wounds, throat, chest, stomach, face. The wounds were not the wounds of a man trying to kill quickly. They were the wounds of a man making a statement. There is one detail from the inquest that has haunted historians for 4 centuries. After the killing was finished and Carlo was walked out of the room, he turned around at the doorway, came back, and stabbed the body of his wife again. A servant heard him shout, "Non è ancora morto." She isn't dead. She had already been dead for some time. When the murders were complete, Carlo ordered his men to drag both bodies out of the bedroom and lay them on the public staircase of Palazzo. He left them there. He went back to his room. He locked the door. He did not sleep. In the morning, the people of Naples walked past the Palazzo San Severo and saw what he had done. 2 of the most famous figures in city, naked, butchered, displayed on the steps like a public proclamation. Una scena teatrale di sangue, a theater scene of blood. Carlo Gesualdo was never arrested, never tried, never even formally questioned by the magistrates of Naples. Under the Neapolitan honor codes of the 16th century, a husband who killed his wife and her lover in flagrante, caught in the act, was committing no crime. The display of the bodies on the public stairs was a legal formality, a way of proving that the murders had been justified by Italian custom. Everyone had to see them. Everyone had to know the husband had been wronged. The Carafa family, the family of the murderer lover, was furious. They wanted vengeance. They began making preparations for a vendetta. And Carlo, knowing that the law could not touch him, but a family knife in the dark certainly could, fled. He left Naples. He retreated to the family castle of Gesualdo, deep in the mountains of Avellino. 2 days' ride from any major city, he withdrew, behind stone walls and arrow slits on a moat. And there, in the castle, he stayed for the rest of his life, for 23 years. What happened inside that castle in those 23 years is the part of the story that most music histories cannot quite bring themselves to tell. He composed obsessively. He wrote 6 books of madrigals, secular vocal works, and the famous Tenebrae responsories. Sacred music for Holy Week. The madrigals from this period are unlike anything else written in Renaissance. They are chromatically twisted, harmonically violent, full of dissonance that would not be considered normal in Western music until the late 1800s. He used chords that Wagner would use 3 centuries later. He used voice leadings that Stravinsky would copy in the 20th century. And the texts of the madrigals he wrote during the exile are almost all about the same thing. They're about a man being killed by the woman who once loved him. They're about pain, they're about death, they're about begging God for release. Moro lasso al mio duolo. I die, Alice, and my suffering. Gia piansi nel dolore. I once wept in pain. He wrote these lyrics himself. He set them to music himself. He performed them privately for few visitors he allowed inside the castle. He was also, by every account, going slowly mad. He hired a personal staff of young male servants whose specific duty was to beat him. He believed that the sins, the murders, the display of the bodies, the failure to receive proper punishment could only be expiated through physical suffering. The servants whipped him daily. They beat him with sticks, according to the testimony of Jesuit priest who visited the castle in 1611. Carlo Gesualdo could not have a bowel movement without first being beaten. The flagellation was the price of his digestion. He married again in 1594. 4 years later, the murders. The Vatican arranged it. His new wife was Eleonora d'Este, of the powerful Este family of Ferrara, and the marriage was a political alliance designed to rehabilitate the Gesualdo name. Eleonora moved into the castle in Avellino. She found a husband who flogged himself nightly, who refused to leave the castle, who composed at all hours of the day and night, and who, very quickly, began to abuse her. Her letters survive. She wrote to her brother, the Duke of Ferrara, begging him to find a way to bring her home. She accused Carlo of beating her. She accused him of denying her food. She accused him of keeping her in rooms she could not leave. The Este family began an investigation. They considered demanding a divorce. They considered, at one point, military intervention. Carlo's defense was that Eleonora was practicing witchcraft against him. He claimed she had hexed him, that she was the cause of his suffering, that the demons that visited him at night were her doing. The matter was eventually dropped. The Vatican preferred peace between 2 noble families to justice for one abused wife. In 1600, 10 years after the murders, Carlo and Eleonora had a son. His name was Alfonsino. The child was sickly from birth. He died at the age of 17 in his sleep of causes the local doctors could not explain. Carlo became convinced that the ghosts of Maria Avalos and Fabrizio Carafa had come for the boy. He claimed to see them in the corridors of the castle. He claimed to hear them whispering at night. He never composed another note after his son's death. He died in September of 1613, alone in the castle. 23 years after the murders, the official cause of the death was unclear. Some accounts say he died of injuries from his own flagellants, that the beating had family killed him. Some accounts say he was poisoned by a member of the Carafa family who had finally penetrated the castle's defenses. Some accounts say he simply collapsed and did not get back up. A few weeks after his death, the castle was struck by lightning. A portion of the east tower burned. The peasants in the surrounding villages said that Maria and Fabrizio had finally come back for him, that the ghost had waited 2 decades and had finished what the Carafa family could not. Forse è vero, forse è leggenda. Perhaps it is true, perhaps it is legend. For 100 years, no one knows. There's one more thing. The music Carlo Gesualdo wrote in those 23 years of isolation, the music he composed in the castle between the floggings and the visitations from ghosts and the abuse of his second wife. That music is now considered one of the great achievements of European art. The Tenebrae responses are still performed in Catholic cathedrals every year during Holy Week. The madrigals are recorded by the finest vocal ensembles in the world. Stravinsky studied them. Aldous Huxley wrote about them. Werner Herzog made a film about them. The Catholic Church, which never punished Carlo Gesualdo for the murders, has never officially acknowledged that there is anything strange about performing his sacred music. The man who butchered his wife in her bed is still technically part of the liturgical tradition of Roman Church. His name appears in concert programs. His music fills cathedrals. The bodies on the stairs of Palazzo San Severo have been forgotten by everyone except a few historians and the families of the dead. So, what do we make of him? He was a murderer. He was a torturer of his second wife. He was a man who built a private prison out of stone and used it to flog himself for 2 decades while writing the most beautiful music of his century. He was protected by his birth, forgiven by his church, and immortalized by his art. And every Easter, somewhere in Europe, in a cathedral, lit by candles, a choir stands up and sings the music of Carlo Gesualdo. The notes rise into vaulted ceiling. The audience closes its eyes. The harmonies are unearthly, ancient, sorrowful. The text is from the Gospels. The composer is a man who once stood in a doorway and shouted that his wife was not yet dead. The music is beautiful. The music has always been beautiful. And somewhere in the silence between the notes, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the sound of 2 bodies being dragged out onto a staircase in Naples. On a cold October morning, 436 years ago, he was a big name.